A millionaire CEO hadn't touched a woman in 20 years, but his new assistant changed everything. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And now, settle in for a story about wounds, trust, and the kind of love that sees you before you even see yourself. Riley Hart had been in towering offices before, but nothing like this. The headquarters of Sterling and Hart felt less like a design firm and more like a cathedral of silence. Walls of smoked glass reflected rows of minimalist desks. Not a phone rang. Not a voice lifted above a whisper. Only the soft hush of heels against stone echoed as she stepped onto the executive floor. She tightened her grip on the strap of her worn leather bag, trying not to look out of place. A sleek digital directory blinked her name to life. Welcome, R. Hart. A coincidence. Or maybe not. She passed a marble sculpture, 3 overlapping arcs, smooth and cold, like the company's infamous founder himself. Damian Sterling. The man who hadn't touched a woman in 20 years. The man whose name was whispered more than spoken. Riley had read the rumors. Obsessive, brilliant, untouchable. Literally. She didn't care about the stories. Not really. She was here for the job and something else. Something. New girl, came a voice behind her. She turned to find a man in his mid-40s leaning against a glass door with the kind of looseness only people with job security could afford. Tall, salt and pepper hair. Smirk. Ready. Max Donahue, he said, offering a hand. CFO. Occasional babysitter. Riley shook his hand with a polite smile. Riley Hart, executive assistant. Hart, huh? He cocked his head. Funny. You and the firm already share a last name, I noticed, she said dryly. You might want to keep your hands to yourself, though, Max added. Just a friendly tip. She raised a brow. He gestured subtly down the hallway. His study is that way. Don't touch anything that looks personal, especially not the drawer on the left. And if I do, you'll make history. And not the kind that ends well. 20 minutes later, Riley was standing inside Damian Sterling's private study. It was the kind of room that made your spine straighten. Clean, clinical, untouched. Dark wood shelves held rows of architectural models, glass awards, and books arranged with surgical precision. A black folder sat on the desk exactly where she'd been told it would be. She picked it up, but paused. Next to it sat a drawer slightly ajar. She didn't mean to open it. Not really. She just nudged it. Inside was a single object, a sketchbook, leather-bound, its cover worn smooth with time. She hesitated, then slid it out slowly. It looked old, uncomfortable in its vulnerability. Nothing else in this place had texture. This did. She opened it. Charcoal exploded across the page, hands clutched in grief, eyes half-rendered in anguish. Another page showed a man crouched in a corner, his outline disintegrating into smoke. On one page, faint watermarks blurred the lines like dried tears. Her breath caught. These weren't designs. They were confessions. And then I said, "Don't touch that." The voice cracked across the room like thunder. Riley jumped, the sketchbook still in her hands. Damian Sterling stood in the doorway. He wasn't just cold. He was glacial. Sharp suit, sharper stare. His gray eyes locked on the sketchbook like it was a bomb about to detonate. Riley's fingers tensed. "I didn't know what it was," she said, calmly closing it. He strode forward, snatched the sketchbook from her, and slammed the drawer shut so hard the desk shuddered. "You were told not to go near it." "No one said anything about the drawer?" "You don't get to touch what you don't understand," he said, quieter now, but far more dangerous. She didn't flinch. I wasn't trying to. His jaw clenched. Out. She stared at him for a beat. His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped the edge of the desk. For all his fury, there was something else behind his eyes. Not rage, not disgust. Something raw, fragile. Riley stepped toward the door, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "I didn't mean to invade anything," she said. He didn't answer. As she reached the threshold, he spoke again, voice low, tight like it had been trapped for years. "You don't even know what you touched." She left. But as the door shut behind her, she wasn't thinking about the sketchbook. She was thinking about his voice, the way it cracked. and the way he looked at her like she'd reached straight into a place he'd sealed shut. Forever, or so he thought. The hallway outside Damien Sterling's study felt colder than when she'd entered. Riley walked briskly, her footsteps the only sound until they weren't. Two assistants down the corridor paused mid-conversation as she passed. One quickly ducked her head behind a tablet. The other glanced at her with something between curiosity and warning. The message was clear: whatever happened in that room had been heard. Riley kept walking, face neutral, pulse racing, not from fear, from something else entirely. Back at her temporary desk, bare, impersonal, parked just outside the glass-paneled executive conference room, she sank into the chair and pulled her notebook from her bag. Not the leather-bound company planner they'd issued her. Her notebook. The one with pages already half filled with quotes, sketches, and her own coded thoughts. She flipped to a clean page and wrote in block letters. He was terrified, not angry. Then softer below, and he touched the book like it could bleed. Riley tapped the pen against her lip. She should have been shaken, maybe even humiliated. She'd been yelled at by the most powerful man in the building on her first day. But something didn't feel right about it. Something didn't match the legend. For a man known to be ice, Damien Sterling had cracked today. She'd seen it in the twitch of his hand and the flare of his eyes, not fury, panic. And there was one more thing. The drawings. They weren't just cathartic. They were desperate. The kind of work done not to impress, but to survive. She knew what those kinds of sketches looked like, because once upon a time they had saved her too. Inside the study, Damien stood exactly where she'd left him. His hand rested on the now locked drawer, white-knuckled. The sketchbook inside felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He hadn't opened it in 19 years, not once, not even after Juliet had left and scorched what remained of his name and heart in the same breath. He'd thought time would seal it off. But now, he could still see her fingers tracing the page, that slow, reverent movement. She hadn't touched it like a gossip hunter or a curious rookie. She'd touched it like it mattered. That was what frightened him most. It hadn't hurt. Not like he expected it to. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Max peeked his head and one brow raised. "You all right? I'm fine." That's what you said before the Voss project caught fire, figuratively and literally. Damien didn't smile. Max sighed. "Listen, it's her first day. She didn't know. And for what it's worth, she didn't run screaming. That's gotta be a first." She touched the book. She didn't combust. That's progress. Damien turned his back, closed the door. Max lingered a beat longer, then nodded. "You're not made of marble, Damien. Just don't wait another 20 years to figure that out." The door clicked shut. Damien stood alone, the silence stretching. Then slowly his hand opened the drawer. He didn't pull the sketchbook out. He just touched it, 2 fingers on leather, like testing a pulse. And then he closed it again. Sterling and Hart didn't run on noise. It ran on ritual. Every coffee mug was matte black. Every step fell on polished stone or hushed wool. Every conversation in the executive wing happened 2 notches quieter than normal, as if volume might shatter the illusion of control. But today the silence was different. It held a pulse. Whispers fluttered like moths from office to office. Riley Hart, the new assistant, had been yelled at by Damien Sterling. Not corrected, not coolly dismissed, yelled at. Do you know what she touched? No one's ever been in that study alone. Was it true? The sketchbook, Riley didn't need to hear it all. She saw the way people paused when she walked by, like she'd accidentally stepped on something sacred. She didn't flinch. She knew how to wear armor in plain sight. That afternoon, she sat alone in the break room, tucked in the corner with a thermos of tea. From her bag, she pulled her personal notebook again, flipped past old sketches, quotes to a fresh page. He was shaking. Not with rage, with memory. Then below that, don't look at him like a mystery to solve. Look at him like a wound that thinks it's a wall. She clicked the pen closed and leaned back. One thing was clear: this job would be more than it appeared. Later that day, Max found her reorganizing print samples in the archive room. "You're doing better than expected," he said, hands in his pockets. Riley glanced over her shoulder. At not getting fired. At not curling up in a corner, he replied. That was an unusually loud moment for him. She turned back to the swatches. People keep acting like I touched something sacred. But it was just a book. Max gave a low chuckle. No, it wasn't. Riley hesitated. You know what was in it, I do, he said more softly now. But I've never seen inside it. None of us have. Not even Juliet. Riley's eyes flicked to him. Juliet Max looked surprised, then nodded. Right. You're new. Juliet Voss, his former partner, Muse collaborator girlfriend. She betrayed him during the Voss Pavilion project, used his sketches to design her own centerpiece, passed it off as her work. Public humiliation. The night after the project collapsed, he stopped touching people. Physically, emotionally, completely. Riley said nothing, letting the weight of the name settle. You broke the rule, Max added, and you're still here, which is rare. I didn't mean to break it. I know. He studied her for a beat, but it still happened. Riley felt the stirrings of something beneath her ribs, not guilt, not fear, curiosity, because the man she'd seen in that moment wasn't just angry. He wasn't even cruel. He was cracked, and something about the crack felt familiar. That night, Riley sat on her bed in her tiny apartment, knees pulled to her chest. The city hummed below her window like a faraway song. She opened her laptop, typed in Juliet Voss, plus Damian Sterling plus sketch scandal. Dozens of headlines surfaced. Lover's Rift destroys $80 million pavilion. The Muse who burned the master. Sterling's silence, a decade of no interviews. She clicked off the screen and reached for the notebook again. On a new page, she wrote, He stopped drawing. She stole the last piece of him. And under that, in smaller script, unless that sketchbook wasn't the last. She remembered the style of those drawings, the raw emotion, the fingerprints of someone barely surviving his own story. And suddenly her own memory answered unbidden. A sketch from years ago, one she found tacked to a corkboard in a shelter waiting room during the worst winter of her life. An anonymous drawing of a girl curled inward like a comma. A single phrase below, even broken things cast shadows. She'd torn it down and kept it. It still lived in the back of her old portfolio. And now, staring into the quiet, she felt the shape of a realization forming in her chest. What if it was him? What if the man everyone feared was the one who once helped her survive? The sketch was still folded, even now, years later. The edges worn soft, the ink faded in corners, but the image remained intact. Riley laid it on the bed, smoothing the creases like it was something living. The girl in the sketch had no face, just the posture of someone who hadn't yet decided whether to collapse or rise. Around her lines formed shadows, jagged, aching, beautiful in their honesty. It had shown up at a youth shelter where Riley used to hide during the worst nights of her adolescence. She remembered sitting cross-legged on the floor next to the bulletin board, staring at that image for hours, while her mother spiraled behind a locked door. She hadn't even known why she kept it. Until now. The style matched the one in Damian's sketchbook, not perfectly, but spiritually. The same restraint in the line work, the same storm behind the simplicity, most of all, the same sadness. She traced the ink, lightly, lips parted. The signature on this one had been scratched out. Just a single letter remained. D. It could be anyone. But her gut whispered otherwise. The next morning at the office, Riley noticed the shift the moment she stepped off the elevator. Sterling and Hart's executive wing was known for order, every object in its place, every employee a quiet professional shadow. But today, even the silence buzzed with something unspoken. A few heads turned as she passed. No one said anything aloud, but the tension lingered like perfume. She found her desk organized and untouched. But when she looked toward the frosted glass doors of Damian's main office, she saw a flicker of motion, his silhouette pacing. Not working. Pacing. Behind her, Max appeared with 2 paper cups in hand. He handed one to her without a word. Chamomile, he said, Figured coffee might turn your pulse into an earthquake today. Thanks, she said, wrapping her hands around the warmth. Is this how you all welcome new hires, only the ones who touch ghosts? Riley glanced at him. You ever think he keeps it locked up because he doesn't want to forget? Not because he wants to move on. Max tilted his head, considering. You're asking the wrong guy, am I? He looked toward Damien's door, then back to her. You're a quiet storm, Riley. Just be careful what you're waking up. Inside his office, Damien stared at his reflection in the black glass of the window. He hadn't slept. Her fingers had brushed the paper gently, like she understood something. Worse, like she recognized it. That terrified him. The drawings weren't supposed to matter anymore. They were relics, fossils of a man who once believed in beauty, before Juliette Voss, before ambition proved sharper than love. But now they pulsed in the back of his mind like reopened wounds. He sat down at his desk and pulled open the drawer again. The sketchbook waited silent as ever. He didn't open it. But he didn't close the drawer either. 3 days passed. Damien didn't speak to her. Not when she delivered his reports. Not when she adjusted his schedule. Not when she handed him a list of meeting notes printed on soft gray linen just the way he liked. He took everything from her hands, without eye contact, without acknowledgement, and without ever letting their fingers touch. Riley didn't expect gratitude, but she did notice the way his posture changed slightly when she was near, the way he sometimes hesitated before closing a door as if listening for something, the way he avoided her more like a man avoiding a mirror than a threat. Late one afternoon, Riley was archiving client contracts in Damien's private administrative files. The cabinets were clinical in their neatness, labels printed with precision, drawers opening without so much as a creak. She was halfway through a file marked Donahue, Pavilion, when something fell from between 2 pages. A letter, folded unmarked and slightly yellowed at the edges. Curious, she opened it. The handwriting was masculine, angular, hesitant in some places, decisive in others. I should have known better than to believe beauty and ambition could exist in the same room without destroying each other. She saw what I couldn't. That vulnerability is currency. And I was bankrupt before the deal was done. Losing the project hurt. Losing her didn't. What hurt was realizing I was the one who held the door open for the betrayal. Riley's heart paused. There was no signature, no date, but every word thudded with something private. Like a confession never meant to surface. She read it again. It didn't sound like Damien's public voice cutting controlled, but it carried the weight of someone deeply, devastatingly familiar with failure. She shouldn't be reading this. She knew that. But the words wouldn't let her go. She folded the letter back up and slid it inside her notebook just for now. As she turned to close the cabinet, she froze. Damien stood in the doorway watching her. The air shifted. His expression was unreadable, but colder than she'd ever seen it. What did you just read? He asked. Her fingers tightened around the notebook, but her voice remained steady. It fell out of a file. You didn't answer my question. She looked at him, then really looked. This wasn't a man angry about privacy. This was a man afraid of something being named. I read something personal, she said. It sounded like someone who got hurt. Badly. His eyes flicked to her notebook. Give it to me. She held it out flat in her hand. He took it without touching her, and for a moment it was as if the air between them solidified. He didn't open it, didn't tear it, just stared at it like it was a mirror he hadn't looked into for years. You think you understand what happened? He said finally. I don't, she replied, but I understand how it feels to be left with pieces you didn't break. Something cracked in his stare, just for a moment. Then he turned, placed the letter in the drawer behind him, and said, This conversation didn't happen. That night, Riley couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his voice, low, broken glass, smooth, more threat than invitation. This conversation didn't happen. But it had. It had happened. And now a new question burned in her chest. Why did that letter feel like it was about me because something about it didn't add up? Damien had been cold, closed off, afraid. She'd felt it all. But this letter, This letter sounded like a man mourning more than a lover. It sounded like someone who had lost himself. She pulled the old sketch from her drawer again, the one from the shelter, The Girl in Shadows. Below it, the faded line, "Even broken things cast shadows." And then she remembered something. When she touched that page in his sketchbook, he hadn't looked angry. Not really. He'd looked like someone who had just seen a ghost. The letter stayed in her mind like a song she couldn't silence. It wasn't just the content, it was the timing. The way it had been tucked in a folder labeled Donahue, Pavilion, and not in the Juliet files or legal records. Max's name on the tab, but Damien's voice in the prose. It begged a single question. Was the letter meant to be found or meant to be forgotten? That night, Riley sat at her kitchen table, the city flickering faintly beyond her window. Her fingers rested on the corner of the shelter sketch now tucked in her personal notebook beside the printed copy of the letter. Two things, drawn years apart, linked by the same emotional signature. Could it be coincidence? Sure. But Riley had stopped believing in coincidence when she was 13 and learned how easily life traded logic for irony. She remembered the first time she saw that sketch in the shelter hallway. She had just turned 19. Her mother had been committed after a psychotic break. Riley had walked into the building alone, hands numb from the cold, unsure whether to scream or sleep. And then, there it was, that sketch, that silhouette, and underneath it those 5 words, "Even broken things cast shadows." That line hadn't saved her life, but it had stopped her spiral, given her something to hold, some whisper of proof that someone somewhere understood what it meant to live, cracked and unfinished. And now she suspected the man behind that sketch sat 20 feet away every day, hiding behind an office built like a vault. A man who had looked at her touching a piece of his past and reacted not like a CEO, but like someone watching a house of cards collapse. The next morning, Max found her early before most of the staff had arrived. She was making tea in the break lounge, her fingers still cool from the walk-in. "You always this quiet in the morning?" he asked, opening the fridge. "Only when I'm thinking." He popped the lid off a smoothie. Dangerous habit in this building. She looked at him curious. "Max? Were you the one who kept that letter?" He blinked. "I mean the one in the Donahue file. The folded one." Max didn't answer right away. He took a sip from his drink, then exhaled. "No, but I didn't move it either." Riley waited. "I found it years ago after Juliet left, tucked in an old binder of structural drafts." He gave a tight shrug. "I read it. Didn't feel right to throw it away. So I let it stay buried where he left it." Why Max looked at her with something between warning and respect. Because sometimes what people bury says more than what they say out loud. Back at her desk, Riley opened her notebook again. She turned to a fresh page. Wrote, "He buried the letter, but he left it where someone might find it. Someone who might understand. And beneath that, I think I was supposed to be here. I just don't know why yet." The retreat wasn't Damien Sterling's idea. It was Max's. Teams bond better outside the grid, Max had said. No cell towers, no coffee carts, no marble floors. Just trees and awkward icebreakers. It's good for morale. Damien hated everything about it. He hated the wood-paneled lodge that smelled like pine and lemon cleaner. He hated the 2 soft beds and the fact that the fire pit was considered a collaboration zone. Mostly, he hated that he couldn't hide behind his skyline view or closed office door. He arrived in a separate car, ate alone, disappeared after every group event. No one expected anything different. Except Riley. Riley hadn't expected to enjoy the retreat either. But there was something about the stillness of the mountains, the way the fog sat low over the lake, like a sleeping thought, that made her restless in a different way. She kept catching herself glancing toward the lodge's upper windows, wondering which one belonged to Damien. He hadn't said a word to her since the letter. Not during the morning seminar, not during the fire safety walkthrough. Not even when she sat across from him during the strategy lunch and accidentally passed him the wrong slide packet. But she could feel him, watching maybe, thinking, certainly avoiding, until that night. The fire alarm screamed at 11:47 p.m. At first, Riley thought it was part of the dream she was having, one where she was back at the shelter alone and breathless. But then she smelled it. Smoke. She sat up fast. The hallway outside her cabin door glowed orange. She grabbed her boots and ran. The small fire started in the kitchen cabin, faulty wiring, someone later said. Most of the team had been evacuated to the lakeside trail. Head counts were being called. But one name kept coming up, unanswered. Hart. Riley Hart. Has anyone seen her? Damien's head snapped up so fast Max actually stopped mid-step. She was in cabin C. Max said, already turning to run. Damien didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the smoke. The hallway was dense with it, acrid and curling like fingers through the air. Damien pulled his shirt up over his nose, eyes burning, and shouted, "Riley!" No answer. He pushed through the heat shoulders, brushing smoke-stained walls. Then a sound. A cough. Weak. He turned the corner and saw her hunched low beneath a window, one arm braced against the wall, face red from the heat. "Don't move," he said, crouching beside her. "Didn't plan on it," she rasped. He looped her arm around his shoulders. Her skin was slick with sweat, her breathing shallow. The second his hand gripped her waist, bearskin to bearskin, something inside him jolted. But he didn't let go. He couldn't. Together, they staggered toward the door. His muscles strained not from the weight of her, but from the weight of the moment. Every nerve in his body screamed, not from pain, from memory. But still he held on. Outside, EMTs took over. Oxygen masks, flashlights, shouting. Damien stood to the side, watching as they checked her lungs, her vitals. Max appeared. "You went in after her," he said. Damien nodded, chest heaving. "She was in the smoke. You carried her out." Another nod. Max stared at him. "You touched her?" Damien didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Later that night, after things had calmed and most of the team had returned to the unburned cabins, Riley found Damien alone behind the lodge. He stood near the fire pit, staring up at the stars as if they might offer clarity. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him. "I'm okay," she said softly. "I know. You touched me." He didn't look at her. "I had to." "No," she said gently. "You chose to." Silence. Then finally he exhaled. "You didn't panic. In the fire?" "No. In the room. With me." Riley looked up at him. "I don't panic around pain. I grew up with it. I listened to it. That's all you were in there. Not fire. Just pain. That cracked something in him." "You said I didn't know what I touched," she said. "But maybe you don't know what you're holding." She turned to go, but stopped. "Thanks for pulling me out." He didn't answer. But when she walked away, she didn't hear the crunch of gravel behind her. Until Riley. She turned. His voice was quiet but certain. "You didn't just survive that fire." She waited. "You changed something. In me." Riley's hands were still trembling when she stepped into her temporary room. Not from the smoke. Not from the fear. From him. She had felt it, Damien's hand pressed firmly against the small of her back, steady and grounding. The rough drag of his palm on her forearm, the way his breath stuttered when their skin touched. His grip wasn't desperate. It wasn't even gentle. It was something else. Like he was holding on to the edge of the world. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulse still thudding in her ears. Her clothes smelled like ash. Her hair was damp with sweat. But her mind replayed every second not of the fire, but of his voice cutting through the smoke. "Don't move. I had to. You changed something. In me." She didn't know what to do with that last one, because the truth was he was changing something in her too. Across the gravel path in the last cabin before the woods, Damien stared at the scar on his left hand. It had been 15 years. The skin had healed, pale warped slightly, but the pain never left. It was never really physical anyway. Juliet had branded him without flames. She'd betrayed him with a whisper, with ambition, with a single crooked smile that undid years of trust. He had never let anyone touch that part of him again. Not until tonight. He'd felt the shape of Riley's body in his arms, felt the tension beneath her skin, the weight of her survival, and the terrifying lack of fear in her touch. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't forget it. He couldn't forget her voice either. You don't panic around pain. I listened to it. He'd built a career on precision, on lines and angles and perfect lighting, but none of it had ever steadied him the way her voice had. Outside, the night air had cooled. The stars hung low, bright and thick like salt scattered across black glass. Riley stepped onto the porch wrapped in a lodge blanket and stood barefoot in the gravel. She didn't expect to see him, but there he was alone again, facing the tree line. She walked toward him slowly. He didn't turn around when she approached, but he didn't walk away either. "You ever think about what fire takes?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. She continued, "It's not just destruction, it's hunger. It reveals what resists it." He turned to look at her now. Really look. His eyes were less steel tonight, more ash, still sharp, still shadowed, but quieter. "I thought I buried the part of me that could still be touched," he said. "But I felt it. When I held you. That part's not gone." Riley took a breath. "You didn't bury it," she said. "You just never gave it a reason to come back." He stared at her a long time. Then, with a voice that barely carried above the trees, "I didn't know how much I missed being seen." And for the first time since she'd arrived at Sterling and Hart, Riley Hart smiled. Not politely, not professionally. Honestly. 3 days after the fire, Riley stood alone inside a quiet gallery in downtown Seattle. The space was small and hidden, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore that smelled like old paper and cinnamon. She'd found the flyer by accident at a coffee kiosk in the retreat lodge's reception room right before they left. Just a name, Anonymous Perspectives, Sketches from the Edge. And the moment she walked in, she knew. It was him. The line work was unmistakable restraint, laced with grief, edges cut sharp with control. One sketch showed a woman from behind, shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Another, a crumbling archway with one column still stubbornly upright. No names, no artist statements. Just frames, glass, and quiet. Then she found it. Her sketch. Or rather, the sketch. The one she'd kept since she was 19. The one she'd carried like armor in a notebook through foster homes, job interviews, hospital waiting rooms. It hung near the back of the exhibit, now newly matted and reframed. Below it, a typed card read, "Donated anonymously, circa 2009. Title, Even Broken Things, Cast Shadows Collection of the Quiet Room Series." And in the corner of the sketch, so faint she had to lean in, was a signature. D. Sterling. Her heart stuttered. She stepped back from the wall. Everything felt too still, too loud. She hadn't been wrong. It had always been him. Back at the office the next day, she didn't knock. She walked straight into Damien's study, holding the gallery pamphlet in her hand. His head lifted when he saw her. "I went to see something," she said, voice calm but wired with purpose. An exhibit. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes froze. She held up the flyer. "You didn't sign most of them, but you signed one." He didn't speak. "I think you knew someone would find it eventually." Damien looked away toward the window where the rain traced diagonal lines across the glass. "That drawing saved my life," Riley said quietly. His head snapped back to her. "I was 19. My mom had just been committed again. I was living in a shelter, barely holding on. And there was this image of a girl dissolving into shadow. It said everything I couldn't say out loud. I didn't know who drew it, but it told me I wasn't alone." She stepped closer. "And then I came here. I saw that sketchbook, and I knew." Still, he said nothing. So she asked, "Why did you hide that part of yourself?" Damien let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. "Because once I let someone see it," he said, "and she used it to destroy me." "Juliet." He nodded. "She took the drawings I made in the dark when I was at my lowest and turned them into leverage. Into her career." "I stopped drawing the day she left." "You didn't stop," Riley said. "You just stopped signing your name." He looked at her, then not with fear or resistance, but with a kind of fragile recognition. "You knew I might find out," she said. "Didn't you?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "I hoped you wouldn't." "But I think part of me hoped you would." Riley moved closer. No clipboard, no schedule. Just presence. I didn't come here to fix you, Damien. He nodded. I know. I came here because your art found me once, and I think I was meant to find you back. The space between them narrowed. No touch. Just shared air, shared knowing. Then Damien reached into the drawer. This time he didn't hesitate. He pulled out the sketchbook, the same one she'd accidentally opened on her first day, and slid it across the desk. No rules this time, he said, voice quiet. Riley opened it slowly, reverently, and as she turned the pages, Damien watched, not waiting for judgment, but waiting to be seen. For a long moment, they just stood there, Riley with her hand on the sketchbook, Damien with his gaze steady but unreadable. The room felt different now, not colder, not tense. Still, like a studio right before the first line touches paper. You know, Riley murmured, her voice almost hesitant. I used to think artists were dangerous. Damien tilted his head slightly. Because they feel too much. No, she said, because they make you feel things you've worked so hard to bury. His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but not a refusal either. I found that sketch when I was 19, she said, fingertips lightly brushing the page with her own image. I didn't even know why it meant so much. Not at the time. I just knew it looked like me, even if it wasn't. Damien folded his arms but said nothing. Riley looked up. Did you know someone would keep it? No. His voice was low. But I think some part of me hoped someone would understand it. That maybe if I couldn't speak, someone else might be able to finish the sentence for me. She exhaled slow and deep. That's what it felt like. Like someone whispering, I've been where you are. Something flickered behind his expression. Not shame, not pride. Recognition. I used to leave them anonymously, he said, pinned to bulletin boards, left in empty lobbies, taped to the backs of shelter doors. It was the only way I knew how to exist in the world without being seen. But you still wanted to be seen. His silence was answer enough. They sat together on the leather sofa beneath the tall window, the sketchbook balanced between them like a bridge. Riley turned another page, a crumpled hand grasping at smoke. Then another two silhouettes on opposite sides of a glass wall. She glanced at Damien. Do you know what this one means? He looked over. Two people, same room, different realities. She nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I thought. She turned one more page. The next drawing was messier, less precise. A figure seated at a desk surrounded by perfect objects, rulers, blueprints, awards. But his shoulders slumped head down, and in the shadows behind him, a version of himself in charcoal face, unguarded, reaching out. Did you ever plan to finish this one? She asked. He shook his head. I didn't think I'd ever meet the person who'd sit beside me while I tried. Riley closed the sketchbook gently and placed it on the table. You already started. Damien studied her. What if I mess it up? She smiled this time, not politely, not cautiously, but with something almost defiant. Then we draw over it. Outside the window, rain had started again, soft and rhythmic. The city glowed through the glass, a watercolor blur of gold and gray. Inside, for the first time in years, Damien Sterling let the silence rest without fearing it. Because he wasn't the only one in it anymore. Riley didn't see it coming. Not at first. The day after the sketchbook sat open between them, Damien was warm, not effusive, but present. He passed her in the hallway and met her eyes. At one point, he even paused beside her desk with something dangerously close to a joke about Max's disastrous lunch order. It wasn't flirtation, it wasn't romance, but it was something. Real, human, soft. Then came the quiet, subtle at first, a skipped meeting, a canceled call, then the unspoken retreat, no glances in the hallway, no passing notes on print layouts, no more glimmers of the man who had opened a door no one else had touched in years. By Friday, it was like it never happened, like she had never happened. What did you do? Max asked, stepping into the break room, hands full of black coffee and sarcasm. Riley didn't look up from her tea. I breathed near him. Must have been a mistake. Ah, Max said, dragging a chair out beside her. You've entered the Great Wall phase. Classic Sterling maneuver. Usually happens after he feels something that wasn't printed on blueprints. Riley gave him a tight smile. Is this where you tell me not to take it personally? No, Max said. This is where I tell you he's a scared man hiding behind a brilliant mask, and he nudged her elbow or someone he can't file away. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened around the teacup. I thought we turned a corner, she said. Max softened. You did. And that's the problem. She confronted him the following Monday. His office was sterile as ever, gray light filtering through rain-streaked windows, papers in perfect stacks. But the air was thick, like static, like tension with nowhere to land. He didn't look up when she walked in. You've been avoiding me, she said. I've been busy. No, you've been hiding. Damien's pen paused mid-signature. I don't hide. She laughed under her breath. You run. Behind schedules, behind silence, behind rules you made up to keep yourself untouchable. He said nothing. So she pressed further. You touched me, Damien. You carried me out of a fire. You showed me who you are in that sketchbook. And now, what we pretend, none of that happened. His voice when it came was so quiet she had to step closer to hear it. What if it was a mistake? Riley blinked. What if I let something in? I can't control, he continued. What if I want more than I can give? You're not broken, she said, almost a whisper. He looked at her, then really looked, and in his expression she saw it. Not anger, not arrogance, fear, not of her. Of what she meant. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not, she said. But I can't stand in the doorway forever hoping you'll let me in. She waited. One breath. Two. But he didn't move. Didn't answer. Riley turned. Just so you know, she said at the threshold, not looking back, I never needed you to carry me. I needed you to stay. She walked out. He didn't stop her. That night alone in her apartment, Riley sat at her table with the old drawing, the one from the shelter, the one he made before he stopped believing in connection. She flipped it over and wrote just one line. You don't get to retreat just because it finally matters. Then she tucked it away and told herself not to cry. Damien sat in his office long after Riley left. The overhead lights were off. The only illumination came from the city lights filtering through his rain-specked window, casting the room in fractured shadows. Her voice still echoed. I never needed you to carry me. I needed you to stay. He rubbed the heel of his hand against his chest, as if he could ease the pressure that had settled there. A weight that had no medical name, just a presence. Familiar. Heavy. The same ache that had filled the space after Juliet left and took his faith in connection with her. He didn't want to admit it, but Riley had reached places Juliet never even knocked on. And that scared the hell out of him. Because if Riley was different, then this could fall apart in a different way. A deeper way. Across the city, Riley lay on her side in bed, one hand pressed flat to her notebook, as if it could steady her thoughts. She hadn't written anything since the confrontation. There were no clean words for this kind of grief. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't betrayal. It was something quieter and somehow more painful hope unraveling. She'd seen it happen before in her mother's eyes during one of her good spells when Riley had dared to believe that things might stay better, that the medicine would keep working, that the chaos wouldn't return. But it always did. People didn't stay, even when you gave them every reason to. Especially then. Damien remained at his desk until dawn. The building was silent, his staff long gone, the HVAC system humming like a lullaby for the broken. He pulled the sketchbook from the drawer again. He didn't open it, just placed his hand flat on the cover the way Riley had done days ago. It was warm from the room, from his palm, from everything it still held inside. How many pages had gone untouched? How many drawings had he buried just to survive? And worse, how many had he never started because there was no one to show them to? His eyes drifted to the corner of the desk where her name still sat on his schedule for tomorrow. Riley Hart, Design Brief Revisions, 10:00 a.m. He closed the planner, slowly, quietly, and sat in the silence. The next morning, Riley showed up right on time. She walked past his door and saw the light on, but didn't pause. She went to her desk, sat down, and pulled her notebook from her bag. She didn't write. Not yet. But she didn't leave either, because some part of her still believed he might walk through that door, that the man behind the sketches was still in there fumbling maybe. But listening. Thursday began like the others. Gray sky, quiet elevator ride. The slow drip of Seattle rain tracing lines down the glass. Riley took her usual path to her desk, nodding absently at the receptionist tucking her bag beneath her chair. And then she saw it. A square object wrapped in plain brown paper sitting in the center of her desk. No envelope. No note. Just a yellow post-it stuck to the top, slanted slightly to the left. For you. Her breath caught. The office was still half empty. Her teammates hadn't arrived. The silence around her made the moment feel even more exposed, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. With careful fingers, she peeled the paper back. The sketchbook. His. Damien's. She hadn't seen it since the night he let her read it. Since the fire. Since the silence that followed. Now it was here. She opened to the first page, heart pounding, and found something new. A charcoal drawing, delicate, sharp, unmistakable. A woman alone at a desk, her posture upright but softened by shadow. Rain streaked down the window beside her. The city outside blurred like a half-remembered dream. But the woman she was drawn with brutal clarity. Strong lines, careful shading. Every detail rendered like it mattered. Beneath it in Damien's unmistakable script, the one who stayed even when I didn't. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes before she could stop them. Not because he apologized. Not because he explained. Because he didn't hide. This wasn't a gesture. It was a surrender. She didn't knock on his office door. Didn't pace or rehearse what to say. Instead, she peeled a fresh post-it from her pad, wrote 5 words in clean, bold pen strokes, and stuck it to the sketchbook cover before walking it quietly to his door. It was slightly ajar. She didn't see him, but she knew he was in there. The air felt different, charged aware. She placed the sketchbook just inside. Then left. Damien didn't move for a full minute. He stared at the door where she'd just disappeared. Then at the sketchbook. Then at the 5 words written on that pale yellow square. You should sign it now. Simple. Not a challenge. Not a plea. A truth. Because it was time. Because she'd seen him even in his absence and still came back. He reached for the sketchbook with unsteady fingers, flipped to the page and stared at the drawing. It was her. But it was also him because she'd become the figure he returned to, the grounding line in a life full of erased drafts. He picked up his pen and signed it. No initials, no disguises. Damien Sterling. Later that afternoon, Riley passed his office again. The door was wide open. He was on the phone, voice low but warm, the sharp edges in his tone dulled like metal left out in the sun. When their eyes met, she paused just for a beat. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. And this time, she didn't either. That evening, long after the last meetings ended and most of the team had filed out with muted goodbyes and coat collars turned against the rain, Riley was still at her desk. She wasn't working. Not really. She was waiting. Not for an apology. Not for closure. Just proof that what he'd offered was more than a moment of weakness. That it was a choice. She was halfway through rereading a vendor proposal when his voice reached her. Not loud, not abrupt. Just close. Walk with me. She turned. Damien stood beside her desk sleeves, rolled eyes softer than she'd ever seen them inside the walls of Sterling and Hart. She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. She rose, grabbed her coat, and followed. They walked without speaking at first, down the hallway, past the glass conference room, out the side exit into the covered courtyard where ivy climbed the brick, and the night smelled faintly of lavender from the nearby garden. Damien's hands were in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched against the damp. This used to be my favorite part of the building, he said quietly. Why'd you stop coming? He didn't look at her when he answered. Because it's where I felt the most human. And that started to feel like a liability. Riley's footsteps slowed. "You signed the sketch," she said. He nodded. "I meant to. For a long time." "Why now?" He stopped walking, turned toward her. "Because you looked at what I gave you," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "and you didn't try to fix it. You didn't run from it. You just stayed." She met his gaze. "I wasn't trying to stay. I was trying to see, and hoping you'd let me." "I think I was afraid," he admitted, "that if I let you see too much, you'd realize I'm not worth that kind of patience." "You're not," she said. His brow furrowed. "You're not worth patience, Damien. You're worth presence. You're worth someone who sees the wreckage and still wants to help rebuild." A breath passed between them. His voice dropped low and shaking. "How do you know I won't break again?" "You will." She stepped forward. "But now I know where the cracks are." They stood in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling. Then, before they went back inside, Damien pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded sheet of rough sketch paper. He handed it to her without explanation. Riley opened it. It wasn't a drawing. It was a quote scribbled in his handwriting. "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Leonard Cohen." She looked up. "You wrote this for me." He shook his head. "I wrote it for myself. But I think I finally know why." The request came in the form of an embossed envelope delivered to Damien's desk, with a handwritten note, "Dear Mr. Sterling, for our 100th anniversary issue of Architect Digest, we're inviting 10 of the most influential minds in design to reflect on the future of architecture and on the inner landscapes that shape it. Would you consider contributing yours respectfully, Elena Marquez, Editor-in-Chief?" It was the kind of invitation that, 10 years ago, would have sparked ambition. Now it stirred something else. Riley found the envelope later that day unopened, placed neatly on the edge of his desk. "You're not going to do it?" she asked gently. Damien looked at her across the room, then down at his hands. "They want polish. They want legacy. And what do you want?" He didn't answer. So she said, "What if it's not about what they expect?" He looked up, and for the first time his eyes weren't calculating what would be remembered. They were asking what needed to be said. 3 days later, Damien sat in the corner of the office library with a legal pad and a pen. No laptop, no assistants, just words scratched by hand slowly, carefully. By the time he finished, his shoulders ached and the paper edges were worn soft from revision. He didn't show the draft to Max. He didn't ask Riley to proof it. He just printed it, signed it, and sent it. The essay was published the following month in Architect Digest's 100th issue. It ran without edits, no title page, no photograph. Just a plain serif heading "What We Build Inside" by Damien Sterling. The opening lines surprised everyone. "I've been called. A lot of things cold, brilliant, impossible to work for." Maybe some of it's true. But what no one sees, what I've never said out loud, is that I stopped building anything for the outside world a long time ago. I just forgot to tell anyone. He wrote about silence, about the collapse of the pavilion, about Juliet, not by name but by story, about betrayal dressed as admiration. And then he wrote this. For years I thought the only way to survive was to stay untouched. I believed that control was safety, that silence was dignity, that art could only come from pain, and that pain was meant to be hidden. But someone walked into my silence and didn't flinch. She saw the pieces I had locked away. She didn't ask for them to be fixed. She just asked for them to be real. He never named Riley, but the world knew. The article went viral. Industry blogs reposted it with titles like "The Untouchable CEO Finally Speaks" and "The Most Human Thing Damien Sterling Has Ever Written." But Riley didn't read the article online. She found a hard copy on her desk the day it dropped folded open to page 42, with a yellow post-it tucked just inside. Still here. She held it in her lap long after the office emptied out. She didn't cry. But she felt something shift in her chest. Something like forgiveness without apology. Like a door once sealed now cracked open just enough for light to slip through. And for once it wasn't just Damien's voice echoing through the words. It was hers too. The article reached inboxes, headlines, and newsstands by noon. By 3 p.m., Sterling and Hart's phone lines were jammed with interview requests. By 4 p.m., Max poked his head into Damien's office with one eyebrow raised and a grin bordering on disbelief. "You realize you just broke the internet, right?" Damien didn't look up from his desk. "I didn't say anything that wasn't true." "No," Max agreed, stepping in fully. "You just said everything you've refused to for 20 years. He dropped a folded Architect Digest on the desk. Page 42 was already dog-eared. "I thought you hated being seen," Max added. Damien looked at the magazine. His own name on the page, his own words below it. "I still do," he murmured. But Max pressed. Damien glanced at the closed door across the office. Riley's door. Her desk had been empty for an hour. She hadn't said goodbye. But some people, he said, slowly deserved to see the truth. Across town, Riley sat on the worn leather couch in her apartment legs, tucked beneath her, the magazine open on her lap. The article had already made its rounds on social media, but she hadn't read the online version. She waited until she was home, until the city noise softened, until the only thing left was the weight of the words. She saw the pieces I had locked away. She didn't ask for them to be fixed. She just asked for them to be real. Her throat tightened. Because this was not a corporate statement, not branding, not calculated image repair. It was him. Not the version polished by press releases, but the one she had seen sitting beside her in the courtyard, fingers ink-stained, voice breaking with questions he hadn't asked in years. He hadn't used her name, and somehow that made it feel even more personal. Because the people who mattered, they'd know. A knock came at her door around 6:30, soft, hesitant, familiar. Riley opened it to find no one there, just a flat-wrapped square propped against the doorframe, a framed sketch. She knelt and turned it over. It was the drawing, the one he'd made after the fire, her wrapped in the blanket starlight above her, gravel at her feet. But now, beneath the charcoal lines, something had been added. A signature. Damien Sterling. And just below it, etched in small, handwritten ink, "Thank you for staying when I disappeared." Her breath hitched, not because it was beautiful, not because it was a gesture, but because it was enough, not a plea, not a performance, just presence. She brought the frame inside, set it on the windowsill, and stared at it for a long time, letting the city fade behind it. He hadn't rung the bell. He didn't need to. Because that drawing said more than any door could. And it meant one thing clearly. He still wanted her there. Riley arrived at 10:07 a.m. intentionally. She didn't need to test him, but something inside her wanted to know, would he wait? He had. Damien stood near the reception desk, not fidgeting or pacing, just standing. One hand in his pocket, the other holding a cardboard coffee cup with her name written on it in clean block letters. Not Ms. Hart. Not a post-it. Just Riley. When she stepped off the elevator, he didn't move, didn't call out. But his eyes found hers immediately. She walked toward him slowly, the hush of the office folding around them like a curtain. No assistant should be late, he said when she reached him, his voice low. "Guess you'll have to put up with it," she replied, taking the cup. A pause. Their fingers brushed. No recoil this time, no apology. Just heat, contact, and something deeper under the surface, like a current too old to be new, but too new to feel safe yet. "You left a copy of your essay on my desk," she said, lifting the cup slightly. "But I assume this was your real follow-up. I figured caffeine might say what I couldn't." "And what exactly were you trying to say?" "That I'm not finished," he said. "Not with what I wrote. Not with you." Her breath caught not from surprise, but from the quiet certainty in his tone. He wasn't reaching. He wasn't performing. He was present. She gave a small nod. "Then maybe I'm not finished either." He led her through the familiar hallway, past the break room, the design board, the quiet corner where she'd once sat scribbling notes alone. But he didn't stop at his office. He took her to the elevator at the end of the West Wing, swiped his keycard, pressed a button she hadn't seen before. When the doors opened, they stepped onto the rooftop terrace. The space was simple weathered tile, an old table, and planters full of wind-brushed lavender. But at the center stood an easel, blank canvas, 2 stools, 2 charcoal pencils in a clear jar. Riley stilled. "You did this." He nodded. "I thought, maybe we draw something together, something not meant to be locked in a drawer." She stepped closer, the city stretching out around them in soft gold and glass. "You don't know how to draw people," she teased gently. "I don't need to," he said. "You're already here." A breeze passed between them. She looked at the canvas, then at him. "You said in your essay that someone walked into your silence and stayed." He held her gaze. "You were that someone." And she stepped forward, lifted her hand, laid it against his cheek. His breath caught, then steadied. He leaned into it, eyes fluttering closed, not in fear, but in something that looked suspiciously like peace. "I'm still here," she said softly. "I know." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Because when she sat beside him and handed him a pencil, Damien didn't hesitate. He took it with both hands, and for the first time in years they began something together, not as a sketch, but as a life. They didn't speak for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because the silence between them had changed. It wasn't a wall now. It was a room, and they were both finally in it. Damien sat on the left stool, back straight, eyes on the blank canvas in front of them. A breeze lifted the edges of his coat, rustled the charcoal pencils in the jar between them. Riley sat beside him, one foot tucked under her coffee cup resting on the ledge behind her. Neither moved, and yet everything had. "I used to be terrified of starting with a blank page," Damien said finally, his voice barely above the wind. "It felt like judgment, like it was waiting to see how I'd fail it." Riley picked up one of the pencils, twirled it once between her fingers. "But it's not waiting to judge you," she said softly. "It's waiting to know you." He turned his head, studied her. "You say things like that," he murmured, "and I forget how long I've been afraid." She glanced over, eyes bright. "Then say something back. With your hands." She offered the pencil. He took it. Then she picked up the second one. They both stared at the page. He drew the first line, a slight curve, loose and uncertain. She followed, sketching next to it, letting her pencil echo his movement. Their strokes didn't match. They didn't try to. But they sat close enough that their sleeves brushed now and then. A circle began to form. Then a line through it. Then something abstract but symmetrical, like 2 figures mirrored but still separate. Damien hesitated. "I don't know what we're drawing," he admitted. "We don't have to know," she said. "We just have to stay in it." He exhaled slow and kept drawing. Below them, the city thrummed with movement, buses sighing at corners, steam rising from rooftop vents, conversations happening in 100 apartments they couldn't see. But up here, time loosened its grip. He sketched what looked like a doorway. She added a light above it. He traced a window in the middle of the frame. She filled it with stars. It didn't look like much, but it looked like theirs. Eventually, the cold air nudged them back to the present. Riley blew gently on her fingers, smudged with charcoal. "We should head back in." Damien didn't move. He looked at the canvas, then at her, then said something he hadn't yet. "I've never let anyone into my work before." "Not really." Riley met his eyes. "You didn't let me in." He blinked, startled. She smiled. "You drew the door. I just walked through it." He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. Because when she stood and reached out her hand to help him up, Damien took it. And for once, he didn't look back. Absolutely. Here's part 10. The story. They'll keep drawing the final chapter. A gentle time skip, a gallery filled with echoes of the past and the quiet, steady presence of 2 people who chose each other not for perfection, but for truth. This is the story's full circle moment where what was once hidden becomes shared, and what was once wounded becomes art. The gallery was quiet just before opening. Soft gold light filtered through the skylights, illuminating frames on clean white walls, some large, some modest, none behind glass. Each sketch bore the unmistakable tension of a hand that once trembled and no longer needed to. The exhibit was titled What He Never Drew, by Damian Sterling, curated by Riley Hart. It wasn't a retrospective. It was a beginning. Each piece hung in gentle defiance of perfection, unfinished lines, jagged shadows overlapping forms that didn't always resolve. But every one of them was signed. D. Sterling. He had finally put his name to what he used to hide, and Riley, who once tiptoed through his silence, now stood proudly beneath his name, not behind it. The first room showcased sketches from the Quiet Room series, anonymous until now. The girl curled in shadow, the crumbling arch, the faceless boy with a paper crown. Beside each sketch, a brief handwritten note. This one was for someone I never met. This one was me when I couldn't say it aloud. This one was a door I didn't know how to open. The second room was new work, co-signed. Riley's curatorial touches were everywhere. Soft lighting on darker frames, a single bench beneath the skylight, a guest book with no prompts and no branding. Just tell us what this made you feel. At the back of the final room was a small, tucked-away alcove. One canvas, one drawing, a rooftop, 2 stools, 2 mugs, a city below sketched faintly in the distance. At the center, 2 figures sitting side by side, their faces not detailed, just the way their knees touched, the way their shoulders tilted toward each other. The plaque read, "What We Started." A note beneath it written in both their hands. This is not the end. This is not the beginning. This is the part where we stayed. DS and RH. Outside the doors opened. People filtered in quietly at first, reverently. Students with notebooks, artists with tired eyes, strangers who had once kept things folded in their wallets or pinned to their kitchen walls. Some cried. Some simply stood still. One woman, middle-aged and kind-eyed, leaned into the guest book and wrote, "I thought I was too late to start again. But now I wonder if maybe I just hadn't found the right line yet." In the far corner of the gallery, Damian and Riley stood together, not posing, not performing, just watching. Their hands weren't clasped, but every now and then their fingers touched. A shared rhythm, a silent reassurance. "I never thought people would show up," he murmured. "They're not here for the art," she said, her voice warm. "They're here for the honesty." He turned to her. "And you?" "I'm here," she said simply, "for all of it." His mouth curved. Not a grin, not a smirk. A truth. They didn't need applause. They didn't need to say we made it. Because they knew. This wasn't a love story about being saved. This was a story about being seen. And choosing every day to stay. Sometimes healing doesn't come from being rescued. It comes from being seen. From someone who walks into your silence and stays. This was a story about presence, trust, and the kind of love that doesn't fix you. It finds you just as you are. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you believe in quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of love that grows through truth, not perfection, you're one of us. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. And don't forget to click the videos on the screen. There's always another chapter waiting. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in the next story.